Greetings, folks. This is Scott, and you're tuning into A Woman's Place, the podcast where we break down all the policies and politics that affect the 51%. That's right, women are half the US population, and Ashley and I are here to give you the facts about how today's events are affecting them. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Good morning, Ashley Brown.
Good morning, Scott Osborne. How are you?
Excellent. It's actually Monday as we tape this, so it's kind of nice to start a fresh week. I'm good.
Right. And we rarely, if ever, tape on a Monday, so that's just something new, keeping us on our toes.
Absolutely. Get
I know.
the taping juices going here early in the week. And you were away, I understand, in music activities this past weekend. Private life here.
I was at music activities, and we were talking about the fact, and I think this is a fun fact. You've never been to Las Vegas. I went to Las Vegas for the first time to see the Eagles at the Sphere, which the Sphere is a very cool experience.
Cool space.
And the Eagles are just, quintessential Americana, right?
How many did people did that Sphere hold?
20,000.
Wow. So it's like an arena indoors, arena stadium kind of thing.
Yeah. So, and it is definitely a sensory experience. So, keep a lookout. And if there's a band or a performance or something you're interested in, they're doing the Wizard of Oz. And apparently that's very like they do the tornadoes and leaves blow at you and all that fun stuff. So yeah,
Okay.
I know, but 2 days was plenty. Plenty.
I don't know if I turned my phone off here, so I want to make sure I've done that. Okay.
know.
But we're talking about something different than the Sphere and the Eagles. We're talking about Gen Zs. Do you think Gen Z know who the Eagles are, Ashley?
So it was, oh my God, what a perfect segue. I think that there's some classics like the Hotel California or that they would.
Almost called classics.
But it was really interesting to be in a space with mostly 50, 60, 70-year-olds. And when Don Henley was like, we've been together for 53 years, that's kind of telling of who the audience is. But it was interesting that even the demographics of Vegas, Gen Z, it hasn't been part of their vernacular of this is where you go for fun or this is where you go, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So, I think there's lots of transitions.
I mean, I'm not going to ask how much your tickets cost, but I think some of it's financial too. This is not a cheap place to vacation or to get tickets, is my understanding. So, your average 20-something might find it prohibitive compared to a local music festival.
That I think would be a really good point. I think everything entertainment wise was pretty expensive. So it's interesting. And it was just another piece of looking at where does money come from, the number of luxury stores. And when I say the number, like there were not one Louis Vuitton, there were like 6 different
stores. So the demographic they're appealing to.
I'm like, who's buying that handbag? It's not like you're going to go into Target and pick up something quick. So it was like, how is this supported? It was interesting. And does that make me the biggest nerd ever that my thoughts were like, what is the economic piece that's, holding all of this up? So I'm telling you, Scott, I am fun every day of the week.
Ashley goes to Vegas
and looks at the economic development piece.
All right. Well, on that happy note,
we never blather.
All right, we never blather. No, we are on Gen Z. No, there's a real reason why I wanted to talk about Gen Zs is because there were some recent polls about what Gen Z think and feel. And I thought it would be useful for us to kind of put some of this on the stage, especially connected to their attitudes about gender. First, kind of, if we can generalize about any generation, but talk a little bit about that. But you're trying to say something.
No, my question was, I thought it would be good. What is the date range we're talking about for Gen Z?
So these are born in 1997 to 2012. So in practical technical terms, that means late teens, ages 13 to 28.
Right.
So that includes some high school, but also your first real working generation in their 20s, independent. This includes our youngest voters, a lot of people who've grown up, it's digital natives. They have grown up totally, even more than the millennials, on smartphones, a whole separate topic, but completely digitally native. And I was thinking about the environment they've grown up in terms of a lot of, compared to some earlier generations, economic instability, as
Mhm.
globalization has shifted things,
Mhm.
lost the manufacturing workforce, certainly a lot of political whipsawing. This is seeing the generation that's gone back and forth from Obama and Biden and Obama and Trump and Biden and Trump, right? Isn't that a
Mhm.
word? So, arguably, however you feel about it, whipsawing from left to right in a way.
Mhm.
And so and with more and more divisive language around that all over. So it's a generation that's been permeated with that. Whether they have chosen to totally tune it out or absorb it is another thing, but that's been the backdrop of their lives. And we'll get to a lot of gender related feelings, attitudes, behaviors are showing up. This is also a generation now that they've witnessed women pursuing higher education more than men. High school
Mhm.
classes, you have more women graduating. College, you have more women graduating.
Mhm.
We have more single women buying homes than single men than ever before. Again, they're not necessarily the home buyers yet, but they're kind of seeing this as they look at the generations above them. For the first time, for the past decade, let me be clear, we have more single women buying homeowners
Mhm.
than single men. Young women are buying homes irrespective of marriage or anything else. That's a
Right.
big shift. Again, it's
Well,
just the
and
world that they're kind of moving up into.
and when you talk about and this just popped into my brain, not only is the shift in single women buying homes, but even the affordability and lack of affordability to access to home ownership, which was always kind of, the beacon on the hill of this
Mhm.
is the foundation of financial security and generational wealth building and all of those things for people, young people not being able to buy homes has shifted their attitudes too, right? I mean, that
Absolutely.
plays in.
Yeah, and across the board. So
Hmm.
home ownership is more and more out of reach. It's also too, they've grown up where fewer households, let me make sure I get this right. Fewer than 50% of households have married people in the household. So they've grown up in a world where the majority of homes are not, whatever their configuration is,
Hmm.
single, partnered but not married. So that is not the norm of the world that they're kind of moving into. This is what they're experiencing. The age of first marriage continues to climb.
Hmm.
It really hit the youngest. It's interesting. It hit the youngest, the late 40s, early 50s. That's why we had a baby boom. It literally just you saw this drop of marital age, and it's been climbing ever since. And now it's, late 20s, 30s, average. And so they're in a world where just sort of leaving home at 21 and getting married is, way from the past. So
Right.
that's the world that Gen Z is moving into. It's also, I mean, we can't not talk about COVID. It's hard to tell in the long term what
Mhm.
sort of resilience or scars that will bring, but that's a generation that in their young life a lot was disrupted. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of attitudes changed about systems. It's also a generation that has no loyalty to any kind of employment or company. That bond has long since been broken.
Mhm.
Talk to anybody young, they know they're kind of on their own. The notion of salary and benefits from a long period of time from a company that, if you liked it, that might stick with
Mhm.
you, that's
Mhm.
a fantasy. So we've got gig workers courtesy partly because of technology,
Right.
like so that's the generation they're moving up into. So I think all of that is interesting, but then there was all these recent polls, both US, I think it was an NBC poll, it's in our show notes, and some global ones that I picked up out of the UK, which reported on it about the gender differences, because that's one of our talks on this. And we can go into some of the details, but the upshot is that Gen Z men are some of the most conservative on gender issues of all the past generations. Even, boomers, old men, Gen Z, etc. They are showing up on a number of questions as more conservative. So it's like this, I hate to use the word backlash, seems loaded, but it does feel like reverting in a search for sort of more old-fashioned traditional norms. They rate things like children and marriage as a high goal. Here we've just
Hmm.
said it's becoming kind of unattainable,
Hmm.
Women in general, these are always generalizations, but statistically, they're pretty good polls. Women you see looking at things like careers more, being much more independent. So when we get to it, I want to talk about what we think it means that Gen Z is becoming more conservative on gender values. And we can talk about exactly what some of the questions they asked are, but that's what we're looking at from a lot of data now. And again, it's not just a US thing, it's a global issue.
Well, and you use the term backlash, and I think pendulum swings. Is that less is that
Fine.
less loaded? But you wonder why, like, what is the comforting piece? Like, I think there's so much psychologically tied to, if we went back to what's perceived, and I put quotes in that, is the traditional family unit, or, would that change the outcomes? Would that make me feel more safe and secure? Or I think it's just really interesting to see how much is at play psychologically to get people to feel a certain way
And we have a show
about.
actually on gender ideology that talks about some of this too, because when we think about, okay, what does it mean to have one a traditional family? That's either coded or just factually a very
Mhm.
patriarchal norm. That is what a traditional family structure has been. Again, whether you're for it or against it, that has been the tradition.
Mhm.
Where there was a certain expectations of roles for men that were, if you will, guaranteed.
Mhm.
And that compact has broken. And so women now have a degree of independence courtesy of equal rights and
Mhm.
education and control over fertility. No question that plays a big role, but that's been around now for 50, 60 plus years. And it is like young men are seeing this and searching for that pendulum swing backwards, whereas some might have said, hey, maybe there's a more forward-looking,
Mhm.
different role to provide some security. But just as one example, 57% of Gen Z men say we're now discriminating against men. They feel discriminated against.
Mhm.
Um, Only significant minorities of women in Gen Z feel that way. Gen Z, 6 in 10 Gen Z men say they're expected to do too much to support equality. That time of feeling like we need support equality fast disappearing, that you do not have universal support. The interesting one, more Gen Z men than any previous generation on record says that a man who stays home to look after his children is less of a man. So you've got some interesting, right?
Wow.
Feeling like, wait a minute, these come like boomers don't say that. They're older. They've been around maybe, but even millennials
Mhm.
don't say that as much. And they're in their childbearing years, really.
Mhm.
So if you've got that attitude really circulating, think about the psychological and sociological ramifications of what that's going to look like. Define themselves as feminist. 53% of Gen Z women say they're a feminist. Again, for some reason, that's become a laden term.
Only
30,
53?
53.
That's a
Mhm.
little sad.
Yeah. But it's more than any other generation. Way
Okay.
more.
All right, we'll
Zoomed up.
take it.
39% of boomers, Gen X, 37%. So I
Okay.
think a lot of it is how the word is interpreted and the need for it. Anyhow,
Mhm.
32% of men.
Okay.
Yeah, and Gen Z is one of the highest percentage. I'm sorry, and that they're 30, yeah, 32% of them would define themselves as feminists, Gen Z men. So you're really getting these
Hmm.
splits. They're also getting splits on one. Here's a US poll that talked about what are their goals in life. I love some of
Mhm.
this stuff. Um, Different visions of a successful life. And here They looked in the US at how people voted to do a cross check.
Right.
Obviously, we know that Trump won last election. It's referring to the last election for this age group. For men who voted for Trump in this age group, 18 to 29, having children was the most important personal definition of success, which I found very,
Interesting.
very telling. Because for women, regardless of who they voted for, it doesn't show up until either number 6 or number 12. So you've got men who are like having children, also being married is number 3. So you
What?
big cohort of men. And again,
Interesting.
nothing wrong with having children or being married. I want to be clear about that.
And
They're saying, I have children, I've been married, fine institutions if you want to partake. You don't have,
yeah.
but they're saying most important, but here's the thing that's telling is women, regardless of who they vote for, it all drops down. Having children is sixth, being married is either ninth, having children is 12th on their list. So the interesting thing again is what is this going to look like? We're not moving in parallel tracks in that generation. And last thing I'll say before I pause here, I find it fascinating because I'm an eternal optimist, a little bit disturbing and a little bit sad that now men they want something that is not singularly in their control, having children, you know? And think about what that would mean. Your most important desire, what does it mean? It literally depends on a woman. I'm sure you could adopt, but
Yes.
leaving that aside. The other things, achieving that you might want. Here's some of the other things that are part of their successful life activities, having financial independence. Presumably, you could do that on your own. Having a job or career you find fulfilling, having enough money to do what you want, owning your own home, being spiritually grounded. As an individual, you have a pretty good chance of pursuing those. Having
hmm
children, what
hmm
do you are dependent on finding a woman in this case.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
when you've
True.
got women who are very, yes, when you've got women who are seeing it very differently for all kinds of reasons we could discuss, think about the import of that and what this is. I don't know where it's going to go, but
Yeah. Well, Scott, think of the shift. That's what's going through my head. And I'm just curious if the listeners, when they're listening to this, are going in the same direction of just that total shift of it always used to be the common perception that it was women who wanted marriage, that women that wanted the traditional, you need to find a man that will then, support you and you can have children and live that idyllic existence. And to have that shift now be for the young men to have that at the top of their list, I mean, that's a pretty big dynamic shift, right? And it feeds into all of the reasons I think why we do have some of the divide and the talking
well,
about things differently.
yeah, I mean, I don't, I'd have to go back. I did not look at polls if there were comparable polls in, let's just say, the 50s or 60s.
hmm
Remember, but there was such a different, this is set in a global situation. There was such a different dependence level. I mean, marriage was almost required for women to have any degree of future in life because of the lack of independence. She wasn't able to have the education or the independent workforce or the independent economy. So you were dependent on the institution of marriage. I mean, that has
hmm
been a very long time. That was part of the bargain, frankly. Men
hmm
would provide, be the breadwinner, women would provide homework, if you will, children, etc. That was, very much part of the bargain. Once that shifted slash broke slash changed,
hmm
um, women now had the opportunity, do have the opportunity to pursue things independently. But what men still want are children and marriage, and that's out of their control. That's out of their control. And they've got to appeal to women without having women be automatically dependent. Again, we're going to talk about this more in our gender ideology talk, but
You know. Well,
that's
and I say
that's
it's out of,
very,
oh, sorry.
yeah.
I say it's out of their control with the exception of so many, that kind of aligns with so many of the restrictive changes that have been made to full bodily autonomy and access to healthcare choices for women, which will be, that can be another topic, Scott.
Yeah, and
That's, I just wanted to explain my face of like,
what's interesting is the data isn't clear on some attitudes toward, for example, toward homosexuality in the LGBTQ world. Some polls show a fairly high acceptance of both men and women toward LGBTQ folks. And part of this is just the phenomenal media omnipresence. It's just become so much more the norm. Will we start to see that split among men and women, in a kind of parallel thing? I don't know yet. It has been said that younger generations are much more accepting and understanding of people stepping outside their gender roles. But men also don't seem to be applying that to their own situations where they want a more quote unquote traditional lifestyle, marriage and children and all that comes with that. So I think that one we'll have to see. We also interestingly have noted that Gen Z men are more religious than women. Never used to be that way. You typically had females with greater religious observance. Now you have men with greater religious observance. More women saying the traditional religions are not providing either what they need or they see the inequality, the role of women as portrayed in traditional religions, and men are seeking out that, whether it's communities, spiritual answers. I can't say what they're seeking, but we do see greater religious observance in Gen Z men than previous generations. So that's another interesting twist. And just another one that we can put in the hopper where we see women and men moving in different directions. And I think this has big import is viewing social media. If social media persists, women and men, they're literally on different platforms. They're watching different things. They're looking at different information. And in a sense, there's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's like saying a man wants to read one book and a woman wants to read another book. Nothing inherently wrong with that,
right.
except to the extent that that gives us a self-perpetuating view of the world. And we start to feel like, because of the way algorithms work on social media and our newsfeed, that if that is our perception of the world, which is in a unigender bubble, what men see is kind of in that bubble, and likewise what women see is in their bubble, how are we going to understand each other? How are we going to find some way of living together, working together, being together, when increasingly even the kind of worldview we consume on media is segregated? We look at different stuff. So that's going to be a very interesting one to watch.
And I think having the awareness of that and understanding it and being able to question and talk through and to say, this is what I'm seeing. Are you seeing any of this, or is this on your radar, or this? And I think that this is a great time for you and I to talk about the trad wife movement.
Oh, yes.
Right? So this whole trad wife, and if you're not familiar with trad wife, it's traditional wife, and I think it gives the epitome of, look what we're showing you, as this is our lifestyle, this is what we're choosing. I want to be the stay-at-home mom, which is great. Like if that's what you want to do and you can afford to do that and it works for your family, fantastic. But these trad wives are business women who are getting paid as content creators for everything they're sharing on social media, right?
Yeah, so just to be clear, the Triedwife online phenomena promotes this vision of old-fashioned domesticity, where the woman is just a homemaker and you have a lot of food making and bread baking and childcare, and the man is the one who goes out into the world and presumably is the breadwinner. And so it glorifies this view of female's role as a strictly domestic one. And it's fascinating. I agree with you. It's what I call a social media phenomena as opposed to a real world phenomena. There is no data at all, except, sure, there might be some women, again, who choose that, or it's right for a couple, decide that that's best for their family for a while. Absolutely. But this notion that it is in any way changing significant numbers of young women's lives is not borne out by anything else. In fact, it's the opposite. Women continue to get educated more. They continue to work. Marriages are going down. It's also, for the vast majority of couples, it's not practical. It's almost feels like an advertising venue for a sort of glorified home life. And you're right, some of the influencers and then that do it is clearly business. It's manufactured. And what's interesting though about modern media is then of course it gets picked up on social media and all of the platforms control what is driven via their algorithms. So if
Right.
there's political or other advertising or financial gain to be had from promoting these sites and postings, they will do it. So it looks like it's something that's happening, but there's no indication it's really happening in any large numbers. I
And
mean,
that's a little
maybe it will
terrifying.
start, but it's like
Yeah.
people think it's out there. But
Hmm.
again, if you look at things like educational and marriage and finances and job data, it's not happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very interesting, but it does say something about people struggling. Let's put it in the best of possible terms. Maybe people struggling with what the hell does this look like? I mean, I suspect, I should say this, I suspect there are women, especially because it can be a tough job market. Absolutely, regardless of your education. It's very hard to make ends meet. If you want to have children, it's hard. There is no question that if you, as part of a married couple, are able to divide this up in a way that works for you, and let's just say the husband is the breadwinner, and that works for your family, people have to make it work however they can. There's nothing
Right.
inherently wrong with that. But the sort of glamorization of it as a lifestyle, notwithstanding the challenges to make it work, is fascinating. And
Yeah.
one more thing, there was a generation of women, probably our mother's age, who had few choices. Certainly my mother's age had few choices except marriage. And then lo and behold, we all know what divorce rates are like, or being widowed or anything else. Suddenly they discovered that they had nothing. There was no social safety net in America once they were on their own with children. We have many,
Hmm.
many female-headed households with children. They had been dependent on someone else who was no longer there, and as a generation, they realized this was not a good place to be in. They were very vulnerable. So I'm not sure how any new future generation of tradwives will conquer that challenge either.
Yeah.
If you're solely dependent on someone else, it can be tough in our society.
Absolutely. And there's
That
a
can-
reason women and single women in particular, whether it's widowed, whether it's single female head of household with kids, are overrepresented in the number of households that struggle.
Yes,
Yeah,
households in poverty, absolutely. Yeah.
I know. So
So that's
takeaways. What are our
takeaway.
takeaways for today?
What are our takeaways on this one? I think it's just something to watch. I think it's something to watch. I mean, if I had a wish list, I would say to Gen Z to please keep trying to keep that door open. I just as a matter of principle, I don't think the siloing will help us.
Hmm.
Um, Notwithstanding that's hard. But to please try to get out of silos as much as possible. But I think this is one we're going to wait and see. Maybe, a year from now, 2 years from now, three, five, we're going to see how it goes. But Gen Z will be the biggest voting bloc in, I think, one or two elections. So,
Well, and the men and women are so divided in that. So I
yeah,
think that'll be really
like they're
interesting.
inhabiting different worlds. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think leaving that door open and continuing to push people to have conversations about the things that matter too,
Yes. Thank you.
I think are really important. So
Let's
anyway,
end on that note.
let's end on that note. Okay, until
Thanks,
next
Ashley.
time.
Till
All
next
right,
time.
Scott.
Take
And
care.
great show notes on this one. Check it out. Lots of good data, lots of good
Yes, all the
info.
polls we reference are in there too. So
Yes. All
take care.
right. We will see you soon.